I'm Mr. Seale, and you're listening to the Mr. Seale Podcast Show. With regards for the Seale versus Downtown DC BID Foundation case over at the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, I'll be giving more news to you about that later, so stay tuned. You can go over to pacermonitor.com or pacer.uscourts.gov, where the U.S. District Courts have made this employment discrimination case public when you want to read the case files and see what's going on. Again, I filed this case against the defendant company, Downtown DC BID Foundation, on January 13th, 2025, and the case number is 1:25CV00079RC. That's Seale versus Downtown DC Foundation. Hey, they should still be my employer, right? I mean, since my last name's Seale, if they care anything about the Great Seal of the United States or the seal of the President of the United States. For those of you on the West Coast of the United States, I'm going to be sending more information about this to Sacramento News and Review and a few other of their local newspapers. And for those of you on the East Coast, The Hill and the Richmond Times-Dispatch. If any of you have ever noticed, when you look at the U.S. map, Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, California are straight across from each other, and you can draw a straight line between the two cities. I'm talking about a super straight line from Washington, D.C. to Sacramento. Seriously. I don't know, however, if the founders of the 13 colonies had that planned back then when they sent people west to build more states for the U.S. or what. It's interesting, though, how those two cities line up like that, especially when you're looking at the political system of both those towns. They're not exactly the same, but Sacramento looks as if they're trying to have a similar DC style to a lot of their territory around the Sacramento downtown area. The only two differences is that Sacramento wants to push for being a skyscraper city, where DC is not focused on many skyscrapers. DC, on the other hand, has a lot more colored people than Sacramento, and that's one of the reasons I like DC more than Sacramento. However, Washington, D.C. still has more high-rise buildings around the downtown area than Sacramento, just not skyscrapers. So depending on what ways you're walking around downtown District of Columbia, you'll feel like the business district and number of buildings are far more than Sacramento, California. Another thing that's interesting is the California State Capitol in Sacramento with its darkish black-green cap, instead of all white like the U.S. Capitol in D.C., makes the city of Sacramento feel like it's multicultural. Okay, I guess a little around that area. California really looks like they should be smart enough by now to have an African-American governor. There's no telling, though, when you're looking from that territory's perspective based on the continuance of specific race issues that still persist in some of their regions that have been in place since the Indians gave up at Sutter's Fort. Speaking of the U.S. District Court case, again, be ready for some Mr. Seale Podcast Show merchandise for sale, hats and other cool stuff that represents my plaintiff claim at U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, because it may be worth a lot of money in the near future, since my last name's Seale, regarding the Great Seal of the United States and the seal of the President position. Records about the case, Seale versus Downtown DC BID Foundation, went to the United States President, UAV Corps at Weewha-Hitchcock, Florida, and Philip Schindler over at Google. However, I don't know whether he read the letters or not, even though Google has the evidence in their system computers of Downtown DC BID Foundation sending the falsified second interview letter to my Google Gmail. As for the Mr. Seale Podcast Show, stay tuned to the show, because I'm going to be talking about some good stuff in the upcoming shows. So far, you can pull this podcast up on some good podcast platforms like Pandora, YouTube, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and many others. So with that all lined up coming your way, see you on the next Mr. Seale Podcast Show.